us to get started, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our panelists this evening, but also to just welcome you to this MHS member event, Gateway to Pride, uncovering St. Louis's LGBTQIA+ past. Your presenters this evening will be Ian Darnell, who is our curatorial assistant of the LGBTQIA+ collections, and myself, Sharon Smith. I'm the curator of civic and personal identity. You'll be hearing mostly from Ian this evening, but you get me right here at the beginning to do a few housekeeping things first off. And the first is that we will be doing a Q&A. You can put your questions to us at any point through the presentation, but we will be answering them at the very end, simply so that we can be sure that we hear everything that Ian has prepared for us this evening. And I want to be sure that we get to that, and then as many questions as we can in the 45 minutes that we have roughly for this evening's presentation. And maybe most importantly, I want to say a thank you to our members. Many of you out there are MHS members, and we really want to say thank you for your membership, for your ongoing support of all three of our locations: Soldiers Memorial, Military Museum, the Library and Research Center, and of course the Missouri History Museum. All three of those facilities depend a lot on the members that help us with programming, and also with your gifts in many, many ways. And we couldn't do what we do without our membership. So thank you. And during this pandemic, it's been very creative how we've all met, and we hope that the programming that we've been able to bring you, things like this evening, have been helpful. And we look forward to the time when we can all just do all of these things in our buildings together again. But until then, here we are. So without further ado, be sure that you write your questions when you have them. We'll get to them at the very end, and we're going to start with this slide here. Gateway to Pride is a new logo for us at the Missouri Historical Society. You may have seen it, you may not have. What this is our collecting initiative for the LGBTQIA+ communities in St. Louis. We wanted, we've had that collecting initiative for a good 5 years now. And what we've wanted was to put a name to it and a logo to it that was meaningful, that also said a lot in a little bit of a space. And we wanted it to be something that was powerful. Gateway to Pride feels that way to us. And so that is now something that you will see a lot when we talk about this particular collecting initiative. And the collecting initiative really is many faceted. We'll talk a lot about it at the very end, but just know that it's really the kind of thing where we can ask of the community as a whole, and hopefully again of our members, in particular our advisors. We pulled together an advisory board a couple years ago now, and we are asking for your help as we embark on this collecting initiative to give us insights into stories of the LGBTQIA+ communities, the objects, the materials that are a part of that story. Those things will be collected for various reasons. First and foremost, to protect them and save them for future generations to be able to come here. They can research. They can also look at those things and maybe learn from them by the things that they have in their own stories and in their own lives that maybe they didn't quite understand before, and we'll be able to help them with that. They'll be able to watch videos and look at manuscripts and objects. And so that wish list comes at the end of this talk. But I say that because it's not just about an exhibit, which will happen in the middle of the 2020s. But it was also going to be something that you'll see virtually, we hope, in the coming months later this year, where we'll begin to look at what we have in the collections through a virtual exhibit, also called Gateway to Pride. So keep that in mind as you go to our website and look at the programming and look at the things that we're doing. Anytime you see this, know that we are working actively to tell these stories so that everyone can find themselves here at the Missouri Historical Society. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ian, and he'll get you started on his talk, and at the very end, we'll look at the collecting initiative again.
Well, thanks so much, Sharon, and thanks so much to everybody attending tonight, especially our members. So before I really get into the meat of tonight's presentation, I thought that we'd review LGBTQIA+, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I know that we're coming from different places and might have varying levels of familiarity with this acronym. So it stands for, to us, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and then that plus at the end indicates that the acronym is also supposed to be inclusive of other related identities. So it's important to keep in mind that there's a tremendous amount of diversity within this acronym, and that the different facets of the acronym, they don't always necessarily think of themselves as being part of the same community or having the same interests or the same experiences. But for us, it's useful and meaningful to think in terms of LGBTQIA+, because there is something that everyone under this umbrella shares, and fundamentally that's that they defy normative or dominant ideas about what it is to be a man or a woman, or along with that, they defy the assumption of normative heterosexuality. So that's what we see all of these facets of the acronym having in common. I want to point out this object that I've included in the slide. This is one of the newest additions to the collections of the Missouri Historical Society. It's a t-shirt for an organization called BASIL, the Bisexual Alliance of St. Louis. It dates to about the turn of the 21st century. And this t-shirt was owned and worn by an activist named Ann Dissinger, an important bisexual activist in the St. Louis area, who was a member of BASIL going back to the early 1990s. So I hope that seeing this is evidence that we really are serious about telling the stories of every letter in this acronym. And we're especially interested in bulking up our representation of the BTQIA+. So if you have anything that you might be able to share about those facets of the acronym, those identities, please let us know. But we'll talk more about that at the end. So tonight I'm going to talk about some facets of the Gateway to Pride collecting initiative. And along the way, I'm going to tell some stories about some of the things that we've already collected, some of the things that are already in the collection. An important caveat, this is not a comprehensive survey of all of the materials in the Missouri Historical Society's LGBTQIA+ collection. While it's still growing, we have managed to bring a lot together already. So tonight we're just going to see a few highlights. We're just going to get a taste of what we have to offer. And then another important caveat, this is not supposed to be a comprehensive survey of St. Louis's LGBTQIA+ history, not even close. St. Louis's LGBTQIA+ history is long, it's complex, it's multifaceted. So the goal of tonight is really just to whet your appetite, to get you curious, and to give you an idea of what Gateway to Pride is all about. We'll also be traveling, roughly speaking, chronologically, starting at the beginning of the 20th century and continuing all the way almost to the present day. So without further ado, so one facet of the collecting initiative is that we're trying to add more LGBTQIA+ voices to our library. So everybody knows about the Missouri History Museum, which is where we have our exhibits displaying the wonderful artifacts in our collections. But it's also important to remember that we have this amazing library and research center on Skinker. It includes an absolutely extraordinary collection of books, newspapers, magazines, and other periodicals documenting St. Louis's history. What we really want to do is to add more LGBTQIA+ voices to that library. So I'd like to talk about one book that's already in the collection, a really amazing book called The Story of a Life. Now this is probably the first LGBTQIA+ autobiography from St. Louis, and it dates to 1901. So here's the inside front cover. So the author of The Story of a Life, we don't know his real name, but he used the pseudonym Claude Hartland. And he grew up in the rural South. As he was growing up, he discovered that he wasn't like most of the other men and boys he knew. For one thing, he sexually and romantically desired other men. And also, when he thought about who he was on the inside, when he thought about who he felt he really was, he often thought of himself more in terms of being a woman or something like a woman or somewhere between being a man and a woman. Now, remember that he grew up in the last decades of the 19th century. So it's hard to use the labels that we use today to describe him. There's a case to be made that he was a gay man. After all, he used male pronouns to refer to himself, and as far as we know, lived his entire life presenting as male. But the fact that he says that he understood himself to be a woman on the inside, or something like a woman, or something between man and woman, maybe suggests that from our 21st century perspective, he was a transgender woman or a non-binary trans person. But the truth is that really any of those labels would be anachronistic. He was coming from a different social context and had a different set of categories to understand his sexuality and gender. But what is clear is that he was a predecessor of the LGBTQIA+ people of today. So after growing up in the rural South, Claude Hartland writes about how he moved to the big city of St. Louis right around the start of the 20th century. Now, it's important to remember that at the time, St. Louis was a booming industrial metropolis, one of the very biggest cities in the country. And that kind of dynamic, growing urban environment offered a lot of possibilities for people whose sexuality and gender were outside the norm. It gave them space to experiment with new ways of life and to connect with each other and build community. And that's exactly the sort of thing that Claude Hartland talks about in his memoir. This photograph on the other side of the screen is of the intersection of Olive and 6th Street in downtown St. Louis from the 1890s, just a few years before Claude Hartland would have seen this intersection himself. Now, in the story of Alive, he talks about one day when he was at this very intersection, and he, as he put it, met someone who was affected as he was. And he says that they recognized each other on sight, being two people whose gender or sexuality fell outside of the norm. So they struck up a conversation and became friends. So this memoir and this photograph gives us an extraordinary opportunity to glimpse the very beginnings of an LGBTQIA+ community in St. Louis. It's a pretty incredible book and a wonderful part of our collection in the library. Just one of many books that you can read. So that takes us to another facet of the initiative, which is asking new questions in the archives. So the Missouri Historical Society has been gathering archival materials, photographs, objects, etc., for more than 150 years. But through almost all of that history, it didn't deliberately collect anything that had to do with LGBTQIA+ people. And certainly if some of that history was mixed in there, it wasn't noted specifically in records or in the catalog. But it turns out that if you're asking the right questions, if you're looking at this archive in the right way, there actually are materials relevant to LGBTQIA+ people in the Missouri Historical Society's extant collections, even in collections that we never thought had anything to do with LGBTQIA+ history. And one great example of that are the images that we've uncovered that reveal pre-Stonewall nightlife in St. Louis, that is gay and lesbian nightlife from the decades before the Stonewall Uprising in 1969. So here's an example. This is from the Isaac Severs collection. Isaac Severs was a photographer active in St. Louis in the 1930s, and he took all sorts of photographs documenting all sorts of things going on around the city at the time. Now, it just so happens that amidst these hundreds of images, he took this photograph. This is a photograph of Mapplethorpe's Cocktail Lounge. It was a nightclub in a hotel in the Central West End on Olive Street. And its main attraction were female impersonators, to use the parlance of the day, what we would think of today as drag queens. Now, Mapplethorpe's Cocktail Lounge was a popular hangout for LGBTQIA people during the Great Depression years, as well as straight St. Louisans who were looking for an adventurous night out. Now, we have to keep in mind that this was legally risky at the time, because in fact, during this era, and in fact, all the way up until the 1980s, it was illegal in St. Louis per a city ordinance to cross-dress. So eventually, the liquor licensing authorities decided that they were going to crack down on Mapplethorpe and revoked her liquor license because she had these female impersonators appearing at her nightclub. Incredibly, she actually went to court to defend her right to have drag shows at her nightclub all the way in the 1930s. This was in 1936, believe it or not. So this photograph, that just happened to be amidst a collection of other photographs, offers this incredible window on an important chapter in LGBTQIA+ history in St. Louis. Here's another example. This is from the collection of the City Planning Agency. MHS inherited a lot of photographs from St. Louis's City Planning Agency, mostly just St. Louis streetscapes that appeared in various reports and plans for neighborhood development and such and so forth. But what this photograph depicts is the 3500 block of Olive. It's in Grand Center. You can see in the background the Continental Life building, if that gives you an idea of where it is, right where Lindell and Olive split and hit Grand near St. Louis University. Near St. Louis University and hit Grand. So from the 1930s until 1980, this was one of the most important gay and lesbian nightlife destinations in the St. Louis area. This photo dates to the 1960s. You can see the Midway Bar, which was mostly a lesbian hangout. You can see the Gateway Bar, which was more a gay men's hangout. And then a little farther down, if you squint your eyes, you can see a sign for Schlitz Beer. That was the Onyx Room. Now, the Onyx Room is not just any other gay bar. It plays a really important role in the rise of the LGBTQIA+ rights movement in St. Louis. And that's because on Halloween night, 1969, a group of 9 people exited the Onyx Room, and they were promptly arrested for cross-dressing, for masquerading. The community's response to that galvanized the LGBTQIA+ movement in St. Louis. They organized, they protested, and they even got a lawyer to convince a judge to drop those charges. So that's often credited as the real beginning of an LGBTQIA+ rights movement in St. Louis. So this photograph, that just happened to be in the City Planning Agency's files, gives us this extraordinary window on LGBTQIA+ nightlife in St. Louis in the 1960s and the beginnings of the movement for LGBTQIA+ rights in St. Louis. Okay. So in addition to reviewing archival sources that were already in the collections of the Missouri Historical Society, we're also bringing new items into the collection, things that we know tell important stories about LGBTQIA+ life in the St. Louis area. So many of the things that we're collecting have to do with community milestones, real moments of progress and positive change. A good example of this are the items we've collected around the early history of Pride celebrations in the St. Louis area. Now, these are some real treasures. These are photographs from what was probably the earliest Pride event in the St. Louis region. So the Pride celebrations that occur every year, and such an important part of the annual calendar for the LGBTQIA+ community, began in 1970. So in June of 1969, the Stonewall Uprising occurred in New York. That was a confrontation between police and protesters following a raid on the Stonewall Bar in Greenwich Village. And that uprising, that riot, is often remembered as a really crucial turning point for the LGBTQIA+ movement. So the following year, in June 1970, there were protests and marches held in cities like New York and Los Angeles and Chicago to mark the first anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. So St. Louis's first Pride celebration that we know of occurred in about 1973, and it was an automobile parade that began in East St. Louis at a gay bar called the Red Bull, and then continued to Forest Park on the other side of the Mississippi River. And these are some photographs of that event. You can see some drag queens in convertibles, and then the convertibles are decked out with placards with the names of different gay bars in the St. Louis area. So here's a glimpse at the very beginning of the Pride tradition in St. Louis. An continuous tradition of Pride festivals and parades in the St. Louis area begins in 1980 with the first St. Louis celebration of lesbian and gay pride. And we're very lucky to have some incredible objects and archival documents pertaining to this momentous event in the community's history. Here's a t-shirt that was worn that day, the first celebration of lesbian and gay pride in 1980. And then here's a document from the archives. It's a schedule of events. It was actually a full week of events, things like film screenings and workshops and dances at different community spaces around the St. Louis area. And then the culmination was what was called a walk for charity, although it was understood by many people who participated as a march or parade. It began in the Central West End in Maryland Plaza, and then concluded with a rally on the steps of Brookings Hall on the campus of Washington University. So we're so lucky to have these pieces that give us a concrete connection to this important event in St. Louis's LGBTQIA+ history. But Gateway to Pride isn't just about collecting stories of progress, stories of positive change. It's also about documenting struggles and loss and tragedy, because that's part of the history as well. But what's important to keep in mind is that often LGBTQIA+ people were able to respond to these challenges by coming together, building community, and engaging in activism to work for their rights. And a great example are the items that we've collected around the AIDS crisis in the St. Louis area. So the AIDS crisis in St. Louis can be traced at least as far back as the end of the 1960s. We know that someone died with HIV in St. Louis in 1969. But the AIDS crisis really came to the public's attention and accelerated in the 1980s. Of course, HIV, the virus that causes the disease called AIDS, can affect anyone, regardless of their gender and sexuality. But it had a particularly devastating impact on LGBTQIA+ people, particularly gay and bisexual men and transgender women. But St. Louis's community came together to respond to the crisis. Here are two examples of that from our archives. This is a flyer for St. Louis Effort for AIDS, which was founded in the mid-1980s, and Blacks Assisting Blacks Against AIDS, which was founded in 1989. Both of these organizations provided material support for people who were affected by HIV and spread awareness about how to prevent the disease. St. Louis Effort for AIDS still exists in the form of Vivint Help. Blacks Assisting Blacks Against AIDS evolved into the organization known as Williams and Associates, which is still in operation today. Important note, Blacks Assisting Blacks Against AIDS in the mid-1990s started what was called the B-Boy Festival as a way to spread awareness about AIDS and to build community among LGBTQIA+ African Americans. That B-Boy Festival later evolved into the annual Black Pride celebration, which is still celebrated today. It's also important to remember that AIDS was political. It wasn't just about medicine or biology. It made people ask questions about the relationship between citizens and government, between the individual and society, and it made them think about what an equitable response to the pandemic might look like. One of the best examples of that is the organization ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And there was a chapter in St. Louis. This is a document from our archives, a flyer for the founding meeting of ACT UP, held at the Sunshine Inn restaurant in the Central West End in 1990. And then this is one of the most amazing objects in the collection that we have so far. This is a foam core coffin, unfortunately very delicate, but it's incredible. It was used in marches and demonstrations by St. Louis's ACT UP chapter as they protested, demanding a more urgent and equitable response to the AIDS crisis. Okay, so a final facet that I'd like to talk about of the Gateway to Pride collecting initiative. We're collecting history as it happens. So history happens every day, even though this presentation today has taken us as far back as the turn of the 20th century. LGBTQIA+ history goes on. And often the best way to make sure that we collect significant materials is to get them soon after they're created. A great example of this is contemporary transgender art and activism in the St. Louis area. I think one of the most exciting things about Gateway to Pride is that over the past few months, we've been able to really build up our collection of items documenting local transgender history. Here's a great example of this. This is a transgender pride flag that was owned by a local transgender activist named Lily Shoto. Lily got a marker and she wrote the names of transgender victims of violence, transgender people around America who died because of hate crimes or suicide. And then as she heard of new names, she continued writing them on the flag. Then she brought this flag to protests and marches in the annual Transgender Day of Remembrance celebration at the Transgender Memorial Garden in the Grove. Very generously, Lily Shoto donated this item to the museum, so we have this spectacular and moving artifact documenting contemporary transgender activism in the St. Louis area. We've also been able to collect a few other items that document the vibrant transgender art scene in St. Louis. One example is this wonderful zine. It's a long-form poem titled The Wagons Ain't Here Yet, written by a local writer named Joss Barton. So that's now in the library, I'm pleased to say. It's a wonderful window on contemporary transgender life in St. Louis. And then here's another item that was just added to the collection. This is a poster, beautifully designed poster created by the organization Keshet, which advocates for LGBTQI Jewish people and their families. They created a series of posters highlighting who they regarded as LGBTQ Jewish heroes. And one of the people they selected was KB Frazier, a St. Louis transgender person who was also one of the leading activists on the ground during the Ferguson uprising. So we have this great piece now in our prints collection that documents ties between transgender identity, Jewish identity, and the Black Lives Matter movement. So sort of a whirlwind tour of just some of the things that we're doing for Gateway to Pride. But as much as we've already collected, we still need more. So Sharon can talk a little bit more about that and how you can help.
Yeah, so as you see here, you know, and Ian has talked eloquently all through this presentation about the kinds of things that we are looking for, the kinds of things that we already have in the collection. But, you know, there's so much. This is such a huge, huge piece of St. Louis's history. And so this wish list, again, is just, you know, it's sort of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you can be very creative in the kinds of things you could think of. You know, the very simple things are photographs, documents, you know, moving imagery, and objects. That's sort of the big four, right, of the things that we collect as an institution. But, you know, we can get a little bit deeper into these. And, you know, what I would do is if I were sitting at home and I had my phone, I might take a picture of this slide and make sure that you have this handy. You know, you can also find this information on our website. But, you know, whatever you have, and Ian, I'm going to ask you to jump in as well. You might have some specific things. But, you know, we are, you know, we're not just looking at these things. Also, we are looking to do oral histories with people. So if there are people that you think have a story to tell and it should be recorded, we also want to know that information, because someday we'll be able to do those person-to-person oral histories. We're already beginning a few of those. Ian's being very creative in how he can, it's good he's in that 30-something crowd or 20-something, whatever you are, where you can make those things happen, because this stuff is happening, as he said, right in front of our eyes, and we have to collect it now. We have to do it now, and it's very, very important. And the way that you can contact us, this Gateway to Pride at mohistory.org will come to both Ian and I to our inboxes, and then we can get back with you. In this moment of pandemic, we are at a place where MHS is saying we can do some form of collecting materials. It means mostly social distancing, so that we maybe talk a lot by email first, and maybe you send us photos. We talk about the things that are important to the collection. We say, hey, we want you to bring these things. We find a time when we're actually in the building because we're not there a lot. And then we find a way to, you know, get the story down and pick up the materials once we maybe see you as a drive-by almost, and you come into the space, and we collect the materials at the outside somewhere. That's sort of the way we're doing it right now. We hope that things will change in the near future and it will become a little less cumbersome to do those things, and we'll do it sort of the way we used to always do it. But know that we are actively collecting now, and we want to know what you have, and we'll certainly get in touch with you if you get in, if you send us that Gateway to Pride email. We'll be able to do that. Ian, do you have more on this slide that you wanted to mention specifically?
Um, so just keep in mind that we're interested in the entire St. Louis region. That means St. Louis City, St. Louis County, but also really eastern Missouri and southern Illinois. So it doesn't have to be something that just has to do with the city of St. Louis. And in fact, we have a need to document LGBTQIA lives in the suburbs and in rural areas that are within our geographical scope. We're interested in any time from the very beginnings of St. Louis's existence or even pre-Columbian times all the way to the present. And we're interested in telling stories that reflect all the diversity and complexity of St. Louis's LGBTQIA plus communities. Okay. Any questions or comments?
And I think that, as we, we'll continue to roll out more and more information on our website. As I mentioned in the very beginning, look this fall if you're really hopeful for seeing things that come out of the collections and what we have. There was supposed to be an exhibit in June. There was going to be a small exhibit in our atrium down in the lower level of the museum that was going to be also titled Gateway to Pride. And it was going to be that first attempt to show you a little bit, show our visitors a little bit of the collection that we have so far, but also to ask a lot of feedback questions. Having questions such as, what stories do you have to tell? What things do you have to offer? Here's just a glimpse at some of the historic moments in St. Louis. Which ones would you add? Things like that. We might have known those answers, but we're not sure if, there would be things we would maybe not know clearly. So that piece was almost ready. It was fairly close. In fact, we had all the content written and we were really close to having the design finished when we all got sent home in quarantine. And because we have been closed then for months, the exhibits that are on the floor currently have been missed by many, many people. So we as an institution chose to keep up what we currently have up. And that meant that Gateway to Pride was one of those pieces that would become a virtual experience as opposed to something on the floor of the museum. So that's what I was hinting at earlier, is hopefully this fall we'll see a little bit of that, and we'll keep rolling it out as we learn how to do virtual experiences. That's also something that's new for us. So when we can figure that out, we'll get that on board and certainly let everybody know that it's there, and it will still have that feedback feature with a lot more possibilities, we think, than even the one would have been in June. Anything you have to add there?
Sounds good to me.
Somebody's raised a hand.
Do you have a question, Tracy? You can maybe send it through the chat function or the Q&A.
Oh, there. We don't have an audio. I wonder if she can do audio. Oh, there you are.
Okay. I was wondering if it was okay I took a photo of the slide showing what we're trying to collect and stories we want to tell. Is it okay if I share that on social media?
Yes, I think that's perfect. I think as long as people know that if they use that Gateway to Pride email, that will be sure that we get it to the people that we can deal with it. But absolutely, we want that out there. Yeah. Thank you, Tracy.
I feel like now is a good time. I get the sense that a lot of people are kind of taking this time at home to go through their files and things. So maybe this is a good chance to uncover something. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else? Any questions? Any ideas? Things we should be thinking about? We're happy to, as I said, we're happy to hear all of that information. And even if it's not that you have something to offer, to the History Museum in the sense of an object or an archive piece or whatever. But if you just have information, if you have somebody that you wish we would talk to, even whether it's an oral history or not, or just some question you might have about what we're doing or how we're doing it, we're happy to talk about any of that. This is a new sort of avenue for the History Museum in the sense of as big as we're doing it. So we want to be sure that we hear all your voices, and we will answer everything that we possibly can. So yeah, just Gateway to Pride at Mo History, and it'll get to both of us. And I think if we don't have anybody else that wants to share anything, then I think I will close simply by saying again, thank you to all of you. I also think that there might be some people out there who are some of our advisors, as well as people who are members. And just again, a big thank you to everybody. This is an effort that has been in the works for a long time, and we are seeing the results in big ways, as Ian said, with all of the responses of people looking at the LGBTQIA+ community in its most diverse way, and we want to be that place that can be that diverse, that will be able to tell everybody's story, and that means it's going to be a huge effort. It's not simply we're going to collect World's Fair and it's sort of a finite thing, right? A finite time in place, but it's something really huge. And so it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of people, and it takes a lot of talking it up all around the community. So thank you again, and look forward to more of these kinds of programs. And to Ian, thank you so much for putting it together. This is always interesting to hear the stories that you come up with and that you can share with us. So without any more, I think we'll say good evening, have a great evening, and stay safe, everyone.